Hi there. Today we have a special episode, and this is because we just released the anniversary release of Stelvio, and I'm here with Michal. Michal, how's it going?
Hey, how are you? Very good, thank you. How's it going for you?
Thank you, I'm good. So we just released the anniversary release of Stelvio, and to some people that listen frequently, they know Stelvio is our tool to manage AWS infrastructure in Python. Uh, yeah, it's a long time since we talked on the podcast. Maybe you could give us a short introduction what happened since then.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to say I'm really happy about this release because it's a first yearly release, and it's a big thing for me because when I started Stelvio, which was more than a year ago, I didn't really know where it gets and how it will go, and it was going somehow. And then you joined me, and now we are two, and it's going faster. So I'm very glad we are here with the anniversary release. Um, what happened since we last talked? So we last talked during Halloween. Since then we have released Christmas release, which
Yeah,
was
that
full of
was our seasonal release schedule, right?
yeah,
Right on Halloween and right on Christmas.
and
So
right
we,
on
we keep
Christmas.
we keep that keep it that way, I guess.
Yeah, not sure how this started. I think it was on X.
Yeah.
We discussed something, and I was like, let's release on Halloween, and you couldn't resist. So um, yeah, then we did Christmas, which was also the closest holiday really. Um, this release is not holiday release. It's an anniversary release, but yeah, we'll find some more holidays later.
I think we will. Maybe next time is Valentine's or something.
Yeah. Um, Regarding our last two releases, so let's talk the Christmas release. Maybe I just summarize. So there was few big things there. One was the dev mode, which you worked on. Another one was state synchronization, which basically allows Stelvio to be used by teams, and there was some function errors and router components. Which of these you like the most, or you're most excited about?
I think the biggest one are the dev mode and the state sync. So the dev mode in particular, because it's kind of my baby, I know that, but the state sync is very important. Maybe we talk about that later about the status of Stelvio. Now that it's the state of the application is synced on S3, it really can be used for Teams. And what that means for Stelvio itself, it may be closer to beta, not alpha anymore.
Yeah, so this was really kind of a feature missing. So actually, more than one person can use the stereo. So this was, I would say, that really is like the S3 sync was a feature which was most missing for the teams. But the dev mode was like a really coolest feature in Stelvio, I think. And it's most it will be like the best improvement to developer experience for people who use Stelvio
Yeah. So
because you
maybe we
don't.
should explain what they do, those two
Yeah,
features.
yeah.
Maybe you start with dev mode and I'll explain the state sync so that we
Okay,
explain vice versa.
okay, cool, fine. So demo. So demo is something really cool because traditionally, when you use serverless and you really want to test your code in production, um, generally you need to deploy and then run the Lambda somehow, either with CLI or AWS console. So it actually, gets triggered, for example, by topic or other event in AWS. Um, and this is doesn't sound like a big deal. You can deploy if you have smaller app, you can deploy in a few seconds. Maybe 10, maybe 15. If you use CloudFormation, it might take a minute. But doesn't sound like a big deal, but you do this 20 times a day or 50 times a day sometime. And what dev mode allows you to do is write your code and deploy basically once in the dev mode, and then you can keep editing your code locally, and you can run it without actually deploying again. So it saves you a lot of times during the day, and like every line you change, every little thing you change, you can immediately test without deploying. And we can go into technical details later maybe, but this is the overview of the
So
developer
you deploy
experience.
once, and then it's on AWS, but your code runs locally. How does that work?
Yeah, so a little bit of magic, but not too much of magic. In the end, technologically it's very simple, although it's kind of cumbersome to implement. The way it works is when you deploy in the dev mode, we don't actually deploy your code. We deploy our Stelvio stub version of your lambdas, all your lambdas, which basically wait there for any AWS events as your normal Lambda would.
Mm.
And when the event is received in actual AWS Lambda, we forward a whole payload back to your computer and execute your Lambda on your code on your computer with the payload which actually was received in AWS. We execute your code locally, and then we send a response back to the Lambda, which then returns it back to whoever called the Lambda originally. And in the background, we use AppSync and WebSockets. So it's quite fast, and also it doesn't really cost you anything when it's not running. So we create
Mm.
AppSync uh, instance for you, and you only pay when you use it.
Great stuff. So then about the state sync. So you
Yeah.
mentioned
So
it.
tell me about
It's about
staging.
deployment, right? As you know, Stelvio uses Pulumi under the hood, which is a declarative way of defining your infrastructure in code. What Stelvio does is we provide high level components for you so that it gets a little easier to manage all those cloud primitives. But eventually you end up with the state because it's declarative in nature. You have a state file where it says, okay, this is what the user wants, and this is what already has been deployed. And this is what Pulumi needs to manage differences in your state. So if you deploy a new thing, if you change something, it consults the state and compares that to your changes, and then the diff of that is actually deployed to AWS. So this state file, this information of what already has been deployed, needs to live somewhere. And up until now, it lived right on your computer, which means that you, as the user, are basically the only one who can use Stelvio in that sense. Because if someone else uses this someone else doesn't have access to your state. So if we now make the state file live inside an S3 bucket, then people can share the same state file. And that means I can work on the app, I can push my changes to Git, you can pull my changes, you can make your changes and deploy to AWS, and we share the same state file. And at this point, it's worth noting that the state file, of course, is not part of your Git repository, but part of our shared AWS account in that sense.
Yeah. That's pretty good description. Yeah. So finally, teams can use Stereo, and we have some. I would just mention we have some. Obviously, this is quite robust, so it's not simply we upload the file to S3 and hope for the best. We have a locking mechanism, so when you deploy, we lock the file so nobody else can deploy in the meantime. Then we unlock the file, and it's pretty robust. So great ways for teams to use Stelvio.
Yeah, we put a lot of effort into making the whole thing robust. I think we now have more than 1,000 unit tests for the entire thing.
Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah, it's over 1,000. Yeah,
Yeah,
and we spend a lot of time on testing. Really, this is infrastructure, so it is, we are not vibe coding here, right? We do test everything, and we have a lot of automated tests to make sure that if something breaks, we know immediately.
yeah. So, other cool features for the anniversary release. What I think this is a big release, and it deserves to be a big release because it's anniversary. But what did we get in there?
Oh, that's a big list. We have there are some internal improvements, but we support a lot more components. Um, Maybe let me get actually the list so I don't forget anything. So in terms of features or AWS components, we have support for SES, which is the email solution from AWS. We have support for SQS, which are queues. We have support for SNS, which are basically pops up topic mechanism. We also have a support for cron, which is using EventBridge in the background, but basically it's a cron from the user perspective. Um, and we also added bucket notifications. We also made functions linkable. We improved dev mode because due to AppSync there was limitation of 240 kilobytes for the request response, but now the limitation was removed. Um, we have some improvements to the router. And the last thing which we added is um, basically the escape hatch for Pulumi. So Stelvio basically uh, supports a lot of AWS components at this point, but obviously to make things easier for people, we don't support every little property.
Yeah,
Which is intentional, right? We try to support like 80% of use cases, 80% of most common use cases to make everything nice and easy. But sometimes you might want to tweak that little thing somewhere for your use case. And up until now, it was not really possible. But now we have an escape hatch, which basically means that you can tweak any little thing, any little when Stelvio creates a Pulumi resources in the background, you have the option to actually tweak whatever you really want in the output. So that's a pretty huge list for anniversary release, and I'm really happy about it. What's your favorite thing there?
Oh, I'm not sure if I have a favorite thing, but my favorite overall thing here is that we get so many features in one release. And I think the background here is that we made the internal APIs a lot more stable, which is another indicator why we removed the alpha status from Stelvio, and we are now officially in beta. So working with all those things really put to the surface that the AWS APIs are different among services. Well, not to say inconsistent, but they are quite different. And we did a lot of work to actually improve the user experience so that for you it feels the same. So what I mean is, for example, in DynamoDB, you have subscriptions. So that basically means that whenever something changes in your table, you can call a Lambda function, for example. You can do something very similar with buckets. So if you upload a file to S3, then you can call a Lambda function and do something with that file. So that conceptually sounds very similar, and it is, but in implementation details, the APIs that AWS provide are very different. So we made sure that to you as a user, it looks the same. And this in turn means that we made a lot of work into making the Stelvio APIs very stable, which in turn allowed us to to implement that many services in that short amount of time for that release. And this is what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, that's really cool because AWS is sometimes very not really inconsistent, as you say. I'm glad they do the stuff the way they do because obviously they don't want to break things they introduced earlier, but they still want to improve the
Yeah,
things which they introduce later. But for developers using actually AWS directly, that creates a lot of friction because things are done a little bit differently here, a little bit differently there, and Stereo tries to unify this and make
yeah,
everything easier for us for developers. So um, yeah. Um, Regarding the internal state, you are right. Like over time, over the course of a year, there was a lot of internal changes. But we got to the point where the whole system is very stable,
hmm,
supporting like broad list of scenarios, and this finally allows us to basically add features faster
yeah,
because we have good tests, we have good system. So now we have this really good way of adding more features with a faster cadence without compromising on quality, which I really like because we are covering significant part of AWS serverless offering, and we are really not far from covering everything, or at least like probably will be over 90% of what people actually use.
yeah. So you mentioned earlier vibe coding. So we have that running gag here on this podcast, how long it takes for someone to mention AI, and now I'm the one who mentioned it first. Well, you mentioned vibe coding first, but like explicitly mentioning AI coding for Stelvio here. Um, what's your take on that? Like we did a lot of work to improve our internal state so that we are able um, to ship features faster. So in your workflow, when you ship a feature, what's the role of AI there?
Yeah, so I do use AI a lot, up to the point where I almost don't write code by hand anymore. But having said that, I'm not wipe coder. I'm not like do me feature and then hope for the best and then test the feature without looking at the code. That's not really
Hmm.
the way I work. The problem I see with this is uh, AI is not lazy. And that's an advantage because it can do a lot of boring things for you. But it also, in my view, it's a biggest disadvantage because that means it's not really lazy to add stuff and more code, more code, more code on top of other more code to make things work. But then I would not want to be the person who comes few years later to figure out something, right?
Yeah,
So the way I use AI is I have a bunch of skills which describe basically precisely how Stelvio works, what is the internal design, what is the architecture, um, with examples and all these
mm,
other things. And then when I use AI, I direct it really carefully about what we want to achieve and how we want to achieve it and what rules to follow. So I don't basically do coding by hand, but I do know about every single line that AI produces. Because I do it iteratively, step by step, rather than do this feature and I come back in a half hour looking at the bunch of code. I do step by step, so file, this and this
mm.
and this and slowly like this. So that's how I work. How do you use AI?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned skills, and you have a bunch of skills that have like the architectural description of what's inside of Stelvio. That looks a bit different for me. I don't have that much skills in my coding agent. Um, but what I realize is the more we get to more features and more stable APIs internally, better documentation, better test coverage, the more the LLMs are able to figure it out themselves. So I also do like the preparation work in defining the API and how it should look like for the user. And mm, I think I'm now at a point where I don't provide that much of further instructions and let just AI take advantage of the code base that we have. I use it a lot to actually write unit tests, um, because it's very good to like figure out the edge cases. Um, I use it a lot to improve documentation. For example, it's very good in finding the direct links to the AWS documentation so that I don't have to Google that myself. Um, and for the implementation, I usually have one vibe coded version in a Git work tree, and then I do it manually and then compare side by side, and then somehow merge it before I do the pull request. So I do a bit of both. But again, like to me, the interesting part is that yeah, what we as like an industry defined as best practices, but were years and decades too lazy to implement, now turns out to be a huge advantage when using AI for coding. So that's test coverage, that's good documentation, that's stable APIs internally, and all this stuff. And yeah, I know we have quite rigid PRs. So usually when you review my PRs or I review yours, we are like tens of comments and discussions. Um, yeah, but in the end, that quality turns out to be not only advantageous to our users, but also advantageous for further improvement with AI agents.
Yeah, definitely. Because like that's the whole point of PR, right? It's not about like you can do stuff alone or with AI, but if you get another
Yeah,
human being looking at it, he will or she will see the things which you have not thought about and so on. And that's obviously one good thing. The other good thing about PR is that you are kind of forced to learn about what I did.
yeah,
So we both know everything kind of at this point, right? Because it's mostly two of us. So um, yeah,
yeah. I think that's in general important. So now this Stelvio project basically consists of you and me. So we are two people developing there. So we can know each other's line very intimately. So
yeah,
I know what you committed, you know what I committed. Um, if it grew bigger at some point in time, that's probably not entirely possible, but at least we should know our own lines that we commit. So I don't commit anything just blindly what AI produced. I just read by it line by line.
yeah. Yeah, definitely, because otherwise, again, we are not in this business for 2 years. Probably together it's like 40 years. Um, and
Oh, don't make us so old, but yeah, yeah, you're probably right.
we've seen a lot of things, and yeah, we don't want to be in the situation that we just need to dig in the pile of code which nobody ever read. So yeah, we try to keep it clean and nice, even with AI.
Yeah. So there's one exception though. I have to admit that. Like for the anniversary release, we also did a relaunch of the website. And that is for the most front end parts of it. There is a lot of wipe coding in there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's fine because this is where maybe I would draw the line between where more kind of vibe coding stuff is can do no harm and where it's really important to make sure that stuff works. So obviously we want to make sure that Stelvio works. It's an infrastructure, it's important. It should not go wrong. With the
Yeah,
website, code might not be maybe that great. Maybe it will not really work on some obscure browser. but if it works 99% of the time, it's probably good enough, even if you don't know every line of JavaScript which is there, because let's face it, it will probably change website again in 3 months or half year, right? So
Yeah.
that's a very nice distinction where, well, sometimes it really does not matter that much, but at some places it really matter a lot that the stuff works properly.
So speaking of the future, now we covered what we did. So what's next? So where's Stelvio heading?
Uh, we have really big plans. I don't even know where to start. Maybe you should start actually. I would say maybe you start. So you start and I try to fill up any gaps of future after. What do you say?
So I think we started with AWS for Python devs, and we narrowed it down to basically the whole serverless story. So that's basically compute like functions and um, not containers, not Kubernetes clusters, but something lightweight, which is like colloquially known as a serverless stack. For that, I guess we still are missing something like a few services like AppSync and Cognito. This is on our roadmap. But for the broader picture, we need to escape that purely serverless approach a bit, I guess. So we need the core services of AWS as well. So that's EC2, and that requires then a VPC, and in turn we could allow like traditional relational databases on like Aurora or RDS. Um, so I think then we would be able to support really like 80% of the use cases for backend development in Python.
Yeah, well, Python is what we are focused on.
Yeah.
Maybe later, I'm not saying no to that, but if we can support maybe a non-Python workflows in the sense that you might have a company where you do mostly Python, but you have some JavaScript Lambda here and there for some reason. We might support that use case. Obviously, same for some frontend. Maybe we are open to adding some little component there to make your Svelte or React app deploy easily on AWS. Why not? But Python is our core focus. So we want to make Stelvio the best tool to deploy Python to AWS, and maybe looking further into the future, maybe not even AWS. We already support Cloudflare domains,
Mhm.
um, and there might be more to come from different places, let's say.
Yeah, I would really love to support workers at that point, because that's a very cool runtime, a very cool service for like small workloads. Um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the experience with Python on Cloudflare workers is not as easy as it is with JavaScript or TypeScript. So we might see where that ends, but I would really love to support it because it's a cool platform.
Yeah. They also have R2, which is S3 alternative, right? And some key value store, I forgot the name. So yeah,
I
there.
think it's just key value, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the name. Okay, it might be key. Yeah, key
KV,
KV
KV, yeah,
KV. Okay,
KV.
that's yeah, that's the name. Yeah. So
There's also D1. So there's R2, which is their S3 equivalent, and the explanation is actually they decreased S to R and 3 to 2. And then they have this SQLite database stuff, which is D1, and I really wonder why they haven't called it D2, because that would sound really cool if you have your files in R2 and your database in D2. So R2 D2.
I don't know.
Maybe they are Trekkies. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe just to sum it up, so on the closest on our roadmap is basically the finish the serverless story. So that's Cognito and AppSync, and at some
Mhm.
point probably step functions.
Hmm.
That, in my view, is complete serverless story. And then we want to move outside of serverless. So obviously RDS and Aurora is like relational
Yeah.
database is the first thing to tackle. For that we need VPC. So we'll do VPC. There is a little trick here. VPC might get a little bit tricky with our dev mode.
Hmm.
Because for that to work properly, you would need to connect to VPC from your local computer. So there is some work, interesting work for us to do to make
Not
this easy.
bastion hosts and all that funny
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And also explaining to users the cost implications there because not everything is free in AWS. Um,
Far
and
from
and
it.
and
Yeah.
once this is done, I think those will be open for us to really focus on containers and so
Mm.
ECS and tasks, which I think it will be also another big milestone because that will allow us to create really cool components for which I believe for something which I believe is still most Python web developers use, which is things like Django and Fast API.
Yeah. Django would be cool. If we have a Django app component in Stelvio, that would be cool.
Yeah, well, we
Uh,
both know that that's our North Star, let's say, for this point. At least for me, we want to have basically one line saying app equals Django app, and you might or might not put in some settings there,
mm,
but ideally, in Django app source equals path to your Django application code, and then just STLV deploy, and there you go, your Django app running on AWS.
yeah, that would be
That's
so
I'm thinking.
cool.
Yep.
That would be really cool.
We will get
Okay.
there sooner or later.
Yeah. Sooner or later. Hopefully sooner. Okay, but anyway, that's the future. Once we are done with the serverless story, I think we should really do like a live coding session. So that I mean, talk is cheap. We committed the code, okay, yeah, but to actually let people see what it feels like to develop an app with Stelvio, we should think of a very cool app idea, probably better than a to-do app, and live code it um, on a stream somewhere.
Yeah,
That
let's
that
do
would be
that.
cool. Do you have any idea what would be a cool app?
Yeah, so this is the thing. Yeah, like to-do apps are boring. On the other
Yeah,
hand, it's kind of simple enough to it's a kind of standard use case, right? So in one regard, it's pretty easy for everyone to follow. I don't really have at this point. I don't really have any cool ideas. But we can think of something.
I think we can also break it down into smaller pieces, so that doesn't have to be an entire app. But the beauty of serverless workflows is that you can really like um, model workflows in your company um, in a very lightweight way. So, for example, if you download a report in CSV format every day and you need to run a script that anonymizes the data and then sends that to your boss via email, that could be easily done with bucket notifications, SES, and no configuration at all. All of that would live inside your AWS account, one Lambda connects it, and that's it basically. So maybe we should also come up with little examples like these, and then maybe one bigger app example that we still need to figure out what that might be.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Let's do that. Small things and
Okay.
then maybe something bigger.
Okay. So very excited that we managed to put all of that in the anniversary release. We will keep you posted when we do our live coding session. And yeah, thank you for listening our retro and rants and thought processes here.
Yeah, thank you. let's give Stelvio a try. It's out of alpha, it's now a beta, so you can give it a try, and I think it is ready for production use, so give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely. Michal, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Bas. See you later. Bye bye.